Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Bayer Live Talks first session called The Bayer Revolution, What's in it for Europe? My name is Paul Adamson, and I'm the chairman of Forum Europe, and I'll be moderating the session for the next hour and a quarter or so. Before I introduce our very distinguished list of speakers, let me briefly set the scene for what we're going to be talking about in the next hour and a quarter or so. As we all know, the United Nations estimates that the global population will reach 10 billion over the next 30 years. Therefore, demand on food supplies and healthcare is expected to intensify, problems already exacerbated over the past 12 months, of course, by the impact of COVID-19. The current pandemic has demonstrated the potential for new technologies to contribute to meeting such challenges. The virus's genome was sequenced in a matter of weeks, while the mRNA vaccines that are now being rolled out across the world are also significant for future disease treatment. The speed of the scientific response is cause for optimism, indicative of a technological revolution, a biorevolution, if you like, in the life sciences. In healthcare, the biorevolution opens the way for new approaches to diseases such as cancer, high blood pressure, and rheumatoid, with the hope of being able to develop curative therapies for sustainability goals that we have given ourselves, while at the same time maintaining a competitive edge on the global scale. We're going to start with a presentation by Stefan Schraf, who's head of public affairs at the European Union at Bayer AG. I will then, when he's finished his opening remarks, bring in to discuss his comments our panel, Claire Berry, Deputy DG of DG Santé, European Commission, Professor Julian Kindelera, Emeritus Professor of Intellectual Property Law, University of Cape Town, and a member of the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies, Jorrit Kivik, Executive Director of the Slow Food Youth Network, and Stefan will rejoin the panel. So that's enough from me by way of introduction. It now gives me very great pleasure to give the floor to Stefan Schraf. Over to you, Stefan.
Thanks, Paul. And good morning also from my side to everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's a pleasure really to have you here, and I welcome you to our launch of the new Bayer Live Talk sessions. Bayer is a life science company active in the fields of healthcare and nutrition, driven by its firm conviction that science can help achieve a high quality of life and at the same time a healthy planet. With the Bayer Live Talks, we aim at fostering an open dialogue on the role of innovation in modern societies and the contribution that innovation can make to overcoming the many challenges that we're faced with. With a growing and aging population, the COVID-19 pandemic that Paul already mentioned, and a looming climate crisis, we are already facing considerable challenges today and are expected to even do so more in the future. We therefore explicitly welcome the UN Sustainability Development Goals and the EU's agenda for a transition to a more sustainable future. Bayer supports the European Commission's sustainability objectives, including the EU Green Deal and its target of becoming the first climate neutral continent by 2050. Actually, we at Bayer have set ourselves in that regard also quite ambitious targets and are aiming for climate neutrality already by 2030. We, however, believe that these goals can only be achieved if Europe continues to foster innovation, which in our view will also be one of the key drivers for Europe to remain competitive globally. Innovation is a key driver in moving towards a future-oriented economy based on decarbonization on the one side and digitalization on the other. And I have to say, these are exciting times for innovation. Take a very current example, and Paul mentioned that already. Who would have thought that at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, that we would be able to develop an effective vaccine so quickly? The vaccine is probably the single most important tool we have in overcoming this crisis, and more than 70% of Europeans are already vaccinated today. Several of the COVID-19 vaccines are based on the so-called mRNA technology, a field in the area of biotech, that initially focused on developing patient-specific medication against certain tumors. Indeed, a new era in biotechnology is currently opening up with tailor-made processes, including the possibility for targeted change to the genome. The revolutionary nature of this cutting-edge innovation has just been underpinned by the winners of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, who have contributed to the discovery of one of the gene technology's sharpest tools, the CRISPR-Cas9 genetic scissors. Progress made in cell biology and genome editing is revolutionizing the life sciences, also in conjunction with digitalization and artificial intelligence. In addition to existing opportunities in the field of health, like cell and gene therapy, gene editing could be applied also in the agricultural sector to provide for more robust plants under difficult climatic conditions, for example. The European Commission has stressed the importance of the European bioeconomy in reaching the climate objectives by unlocking the full potential of this sector. The recently published studies on new genomic techniques also finds that several plant products obtained from new genomic techniques have the potential to contribute to the objectives of the EU Farm to Fork and biodiversity strategies, for instance, but that the current regulatory system involves implementation and enforcement challenges in the European Union. In addition to overcoming such regulatory challenges, we firmly believe that biotech should be increasingly recognized as a significant opportunity for Europe. The establishment, for example, of an important project of common European interest in this field and a new comprehensive EU biotechnology strategy could further support this development. In our view, as society, we should dare to ask, what if disease like Parkinson's disease weren't disease anymore that we can only treat but cure? What if we could create carbon positive agriculture, for example? But we also need to understand, of course, the concerns linked to the uptake of new technologies. We do acknowledge that there are still several open questions concerning the potential risks of new genomic techniques. How can we, for example, ensure consumer choice? What form of risk management system do we need for these new technologies? And it is precisely the goal today to shed light on those questions and to have an open and honest debate that can help identifying the most critical issues Europe needs to consider when deciding on the pathway to take. I very much look forward now to our discussion today and to also continuously exchange with you on further topics in one of the future live talk sessions. Thanks again to all of you for joining today. And with that, I hand it back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for setting out the stall so clearly and so comprehensively. Just a message to our audience that we are looking for your input and feedback as well into this discussion. So we very welcome questions you can put in the chat function, which will find their way to me, and I will do my very best to cover all of them and address them to the panel. And we're going to also have a couple of poll questions to put to you, the first of which is already about to be announced. You'll see in the ticker beneath me as I speak. The question is as follows. Do you think we already have an open and broad enough public discourse on new biotechnological technologies to find a societal consensus on how to make or not make use of these technologies? Do we already have an open and broad enough public discourse on new biotech technologies to find a societal consensus on how to make or not make use of them? That's the poll question number one. And as soon as the results are available, I will announce the result to everybody. Now, let me move on and bring in the panelists who I've briefly introduced at the very beginning of this session. Great pleasure to welcome Claire Berry. Welcome, Claire. Julian Kindelera. Welcome, Julian. And Jorrit Kivik. Welcome, Jorrit. I'm going to first of all ask Claire the following question. If you And maybe somebody could mute. We have a bit of sound. If you could all put yourselves on mute, that might help. Apart from Claire, who's about to speak. A question for you, Claire. Could you please tell us a bit about the background of your recent commission study on new genomic techniques, and what are the next steps as far as the European Commission is concerned? Over to you.
Thanks very much, Paul, and good morning. Thanks very much for organising this debate. It's a pleasure to be here with all the members of the panel. Yeah, sure. I'm very happy to say some words about where we are in the Commission. So we were requested by the Council to produce a study, which we did in April. And I have to say, the study has received a very positive response. I think the words that I've heard in terms of describing it are that it's very balanced. It puts forward the challenges clearly. And I think, hopefully, it can frame a debate now in the coming months, the kind of debate that we need on these new genomic techniques. When the Commission put forward the study to the Council, we said that we thought that we need a policy action on plants in relation to new genomic techniques. We think that that action is necessary to address the shortcomings of the current situation and to try and capture the innovation that we need. I think it's very clear in what Stefan was saying, that we do need to now move forward and capture innovation in a positive way, but we need to look at what the challenges are and see how we want to do that together. The study confirmed what we thought already when we adopted the strategy in May 2020, the Farm to Fork strategy, that the new genomic techniques can really make a contribution to the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy, and hopefully get us into a more competitive position as the EU as well. But the other conclusion of the study was that the current GMO regulation is not fit for purpose. So what we are doing now is we will carry out an impact assessment, which obviously is a first step in terms of if we will change the legislation. We want to look at the policy options. We will not propose to deregulate, to lower standards, because I know there's concern around that. But what we want is to try and make sure that we get a proportionate regulatory framework. So we'll be looking in the impact assessment at how we can combine a high level of safety, identify where there may be clear benefits for society and for the environment, how we can benefit sustainability. I think Stefan was saying as well, he gave some examples there of how the new genomic techniques, by producing, for example, pest-resistant plants, which can then help in terms of sustainability because we don't need so many pesticides. But we will look very clearly at the concerns that have been expressed, which were also stated in the study, to see how we need to modify the legislative framework to take those into account. We're interested in all views. We will be coming forward. The next step is that we publish what's called our Inception Impact Analysis, which is very much the possible ideas that we're thinking of. We're hoping to come forward with that by October. We want a debate that is informed. We hope informed by the study, which, as I say, is balanced, but of course informed by others who come in and bring their knowledge and experience and all the other considerations, people like Julian as well on the ethical side. And we want that debate to be open and we want it to be inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to the next steps as well, when everybody's spoken on the panel. Thank you, Claire. Let me turn now to Julian, Professor. May I ask you this question, Julian? What are the opportunities, in your view, and potential risks of gene editing in different areas, and what comes next as far as you're concerned in terms of the innovation potential?
Thank you, Paul, and it's a fascinating question. The European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies produced a paper earlier this year providing advice to the Commission on many issues that are related to the use of these many new technologies called gene editing. We can easily and with precision modify the genomes of most organisms. Not total precision yet. We can modify humans. Maybe we shouldn't, but we can. We can modify animals. We can modify insects, microorganisms, including viruses, which has already been pointed out by Stefan, and we can modify plants, which is probably the easiest, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Is the technology precise enough to warrant its use? Is it safe enough, particularly in humans? We weren't particularly sure that that was the case. This development of new RNA vaccines, as has been mentioned before, shows that the technology is capable of being used for the benefit of humankind. Let's look at humans first, because it's an easy one, in a sense. The humans, we have a number of diseases which could be corrected using the new technologies. Hemoglobin S, sickle cell disease, is the one that has been the main one which has been worked on. It's a single base change in the beta chain of human hemoglobin that results in a disease state. But that's an interesting statement, a single base change, which means that if the precision isn't great enough, we might have a problem when we use these new technologies. We've got to be very careful, particularly in humans. If we look at what could be done in animals, why do we want to modify animals? One is for research purposes, and most of the animals we use are things like zebrafish, embryos, or mice, or rats, but we also use non-human primates. Why? So that we can understand the science, the development of these organisms, which eventually feed back into understanding our own development. But should we? There are arguments for modifying non-human primates to humanize them. Is that something we want to do? We can modify pigs to produce organs which we can then transplant into humans. But that has an impact on the whole range of pigs and might need separation from other pigs, which is an issue which needs to be thought about. Plants, I said, are easier. Why? We can modify a plant and then select those plants that have not suffered deleterious modifications because of the way we can grow plants from a single cell. And in that case, it's probably where we should be starting and where we are starting to produce new plants with new modifications which may be helpful to humans. Only a short while ago, the yellow rice, which contains, which changes the way in which the plant can be used in most of Asia for human nutrition, was allowed in the Philippines at last over many years. And here we have a discussion as to whether the new gene editing techniques are GMOs, which was pointed out by Claire, or not. If they are, and the European Court has decided they should be treated under the legislation for GMOs, what should we do? Is the degree of modification of the organism taken into account? We could change the way a whole plant reacts to light, but that will have a major and significant effect on the whole plant system. In another event, we can simply change a very small part, one enzyme, for example. Is that a good thing when we introduce it into the environment? These are the things we've been thinking about. I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you, Julian. Absolutely fascinating. Before I turn to Jorrit, we had the results of the poll question I posed earlier in. Just remind you the question to the audience: do you think we already have an open and broad enough public discourse on new biotech technologies to find a societal consensus on how to make or not make use of these technologies? The answer is 100% no. So that makes today's discussion even more useful. Right. I now turn to Jorrit. My question to you, Jorrit, is the following: which ethical and societal concerns must be taken into account when considering the opportunities of gene editing and potential further evolutions in this area. And maybe in answering your question, maybe say a few words also, please, about the Slow Food Youth Network. Over to you, Jorrit.
Sure. Thank you so much, Paul. Hello, everyone. I am Jorrit Kiewik. I'm the Executive Director of the Slow Food Youth Network. And together with my family, I'm also running a farm back in the Netherlands. Our movement, the Slow Food Youth Network, exists out of youth from all throughout the food chain, based all over the world. We try to enhance sustainability by preserving biodiversity, educate the wider crowd, and promote sustainable practices among our society. And our work covers a variety of topics, including issues like food waste, climate change, and social injustice. We address each issue with concrete ideas to do better by each other and our Earth. And whether it be in an educational setting, a festival, a protest, or a potluck, we always try to find and learn from each other and to celebrate food that promotes dignified labor and sustainable production and honor its cultural significance. But then over to the biorevolution. The first point why I'm a bit skeptical about the biorevolution within the agricultural system is that there is a democratic point of view. Citizens want to be able to choose the food they consume. Together, we've been working to create a food system which is transparent, which often shows which product is from which area, which shows how the product is produced, it shows how the product is built up and what is inside. Consumers would like to be able to choose, for example, between organic and non-organic. They'd like to choose between a diet which is vegetarian or non-vegetarian. And the same counts for GMO or non-GMO food. Next to that, farmers need to be free to choose whatever they want to grow. Our food system needs to be free of patents, which are not in favor of producers, and have the ability to choose whatever we want to grow. We've been working collectively to create a food chain which becomes more transparent, and we should not stop that development. Secondly, we've been hearing a lot about the potential of the new generation of GMOs, claiming that they're in favor of a more sustainable food system. But also, according to many, this is all a huge, some say, a waste of time, money and resources. For example, of the 16 crops that are currently in the pre-commercial stage, the largest share is focused at herbicide tolerance, which promotes, in the end, the use of herbicides and is in contrast with our targets to reduce them, as set, for example, in the Farm to Fork strategy. There is none focused at abiotic stress, which means the non-living factors like extreme weather. It seems like a distraction of a transition towards a proven system like agroecology farming, which is also in line with the Farm to Fork strategy. Shortly, there's currently no real evidence that the new GMOs will contribute to a transition to truly sustainable food systems. And even though our position as Slow Food only concerns food and farming, I would like to remind that biotech in the medical and agricultural fields are not really comparable from both a regulatory angle as well as from a societal angle. Food systems are very complex. They involve people, farmers, diets, and are in the end taking place in an uncontrolled environment. And for that reason, even though we're not against innovation, we don't think that new GMOs should be deregulated. Thank you.
I have questions for Stefan to bring it back into discussion, but I think before I ask you a specific question, Stefan, maybe you should respond to what Jorrit just said, because it was a pretty direct comment on what you were saying. So how do you respond to Jorrit's concerns?
So thanks, Paul. First of all, I would say that on a number of topics, actually, Jorrit, I think we would definitely agree that we haven't yet found the final solution how to deal with the new technologies. You were mentioning the topic of transparent food systems and consumers' choice. I think that's still an area that we're working on. This implies, for example, the traceability of plants which were derived from these new technologies. And currently, we don't have these technologies yet. They're being worked on. We're quite confident, actually, that we will see technology in the market soon to have that traceability. Of course, there's also then the obligation for those companies developing such plants to be transparent about placing them on the market. So these two, maybe just these two aspects on the point on freedom of choice. One remark also with regards what's in the pipeline. You mentioned that the majority is still on herbicide-tolerant resistance. That's at the moment, yes. I mean, we are still developing also traits in that direction. But I think if you look at what's in the pipeline a little bit further down the road, we really see very interesting projects coming along. I mean, just to name two that we are working on as Bayer. For example, one is to have a new plant, a new banana plant, which is resistant to certain funguses. We have huge problems in banana growing. This was one point that Claire also mentioned already. Of course, by developing such new plants, we could reduce the use of plant protection products on the other side, which has a positive effect when it comes to the environmental effects of those products, but also from a climate point of view, because of course producing those substances really needs a lot of energy. So we could also contribute to climate change and climate protection by doing so. Another quick example I want to mention here, we're, for example, at the moment working on also a new project to develop plants which can more easily take up fertilizer and nitrogen, which again I think would really open the door also with regards to sustainability improvements, because nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer is taking up about 3% of the energy globally that we're at the moment using just to produce those inputs. So if we could really develop plants which by themselves can take up more easily nitrogen from the air, we would really advance a huge step, I think, also on the sustainability side. And those are the projects I think that we are seeing coming down the pipeline, and therefore I would say let's give us a bit more time really to see also the advantages from the sustainability side coming up in the pipeline.
Thank you, Stefan. But let me bring back Claire, if I may, Claire, because you said your study got a good response, very positive response, very balanced. It's going to frame the debate on these new technologies going forward, and you're going through, maybe you're using a classic EU Commission or EU policy-making toolkit, impact assessment, consultations. To what extent do you think the political, the scientific, the public debate on the broad issues of these technologies has moved on since the initial GMO regulation? You said very boldly the current GMO regulation is not fit for purpose. It has to be looked at again. But do you have any concerns that people have already made their minds up in advance, or do we sense, because things have moved on in the scientific, political, and public sphere, that there will be a new, fresh, open debate this time around?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a very good question. But I think what's clear to us, and it's obviously the result from the poll as well, is that we need to have that debate. I think maybe one thing that is helpful to us is indeed all the developments that have gone on around the vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, which show the benefits that this can have for society. I mean, okay, that was to respond to a pandemic. We needed to respond quickly, but I think it does show the benefits. But clearly, now what we need is an open debate. I think what's very interesting about what Julian said as well is, why would we do this? And I think that has to be part of the debate, and we have to be able to show how we're doing the weighing and what the benefits for humans would be. I mean, if I can respond a bit to Jorrit as well. I mean, he said that what we have in the pipeline at the moment isn't going towards sustainability, which is, I think, one of the reasons why we need to change the framework, because what we want to do is point it in the direction of sustainability, and that these weather developments are going to be made. I think the new genomic techniques are different. To a certain extent, legally, they're in the same basket as the GMOs, but they are different. And I think we need to look at those differences. We're not talking about deregulating. We're talking about, I would say, re-regulating, so that we actually really take account of the specific policy considerations around these kind of techniques. You're absolutely right, Jorrit, that we need to think about consumers, and we're very conscious of that, and we know that consumers want to choose. In the Farm to Fork strategy, we have several policy actions there towards labelling, including sustainability labelling. We know that's the direction of travel that consumers want to go in. They want to know, they want to understand. So we will look, of course, as well at to what extent the labelling can be relevant and traceability can be relevant for the NGTs. Now, what we see so far is that the jury is a bit out on that, that it's not 100% clear since we don't have the detection methods. That's one of the differences with the NGTs, that the traceability will be that useful. But we very much put the consumer in the middle of our concerns on this. We will take into account the fact that consumers want transparency and that we need to give them the tools that help them to do that.
Thank you, Claire. If I turn back to you, Julian, if I may, I was struck by, in your opening remarks, you talked a lot about the precision of new technologies. Obviously, life being what it is, 100% precision is impossible. I just wonder whether the society, citizens, the consumers need to be educated. It sounds very patronizing that nothing is going to be perfect, totally risk-free, or whether the scientists and the policymakers and the regulators need to change the way they communicate to consumers. If you could please unmute yourself, Julian, as well when you answer. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's fine.
There's so
Go
much
ahead.
there that one could spend a long time talking about. Let's start. The aim of those who used to make GMOs was primarily at farmers. What are the requirements that the farmer needs in order to increase yield, in order to make a product which was better suited to use, but it wasn't at consumers. And that was a major problem, I think, when the whole technology started off. So I agree very much with the statement that's come from Claire, that we need to think very much about consumers. She also mentioned the concept of proportionality. And I think that's going to be a very important concept in any redrafting of legislation in this area, particularly for plants. Let me think about some of the things that Jorrit said for a moment, if I might. Patents. Most plants in Europe, as opposed to the United States, are covered by plant variety rights, not patents, as yet. Which means that developers can use a plant which is already on the market as a starting point for creating a new variety. And we have to be aware as well that the lifetime of a variety that's currently in the field is not very long before we replace it with another one for all sorts of reasons. And the replacement is, of course, involves the company that produces the plant, which wants to sell it to the farmer. So we've got to think about those as well. The patents on there's a lot of stress on patents at the moment, but I'm not sure that they are as significant as people indicate. There's so much that one could talk about in this area. And I'm going to leave it there for the moment and come back if I can.
No, we'll come back to you certainly, Julian. You have so much to offer this discussion. I'm going to turn back to you, Jorrit, because you're the lucky recipient of the first direct question from the chat, from a gentleman called David Zaruk, environmental health risk analyst at the Riskmonger. I'm not quite sure what that is. The question is from David, does social justice for smallholders include means to increase yields and guarantee crop security? Does securing choice for farmers and consumers mean banning seed technologies and important pesticides? A slightly loaded question, I think, but you can see where it's coming from, Jorrit.
Thank you so much, David. I think this is an extremely important question, and I would say that first of all, that if we really want to increase social justice towards small-scale farmers, we should always make sure that they have indeed the right tools, and that they have the choice to choose whatever tool they want to do in order to have that transition and to really go towards a better yield. Also, when this, for example, means that these farmers need support in, for example, transition to agroecology. Then to answer the second part of your question, which was related to the securing choice for farmers means if it needs to be banned, these new GMOs. I'm not asking for new GMOs to be banned. I am GMOs are not banned in the European Union, and yeah, again, I'm not asking to ban them, but we're asking to keep them remain regulated as they currently are, because that's coming from a matter of precautionary principle, and I believe that is very important to maintain. I hope that answers your question, David.
Right. Okay. I'm sure David will come back to us if he wants to come back to you, Jorrit. An excellent question also in the chat from our audience from Tessa de Villiers, who's a biotechnology consultant. Could the panel comment on Europe's role in the biorevolution vis-a-vis global developments? Is there a parallel with the development and ethics around AI? And if I could maybe build on Tessa's question, if you will allow me, Tessa. So it's about the ethics side of AI, which is an open debate at the moment, very heated in Europe already, but also about to what extent Europe can lead in AI. It was kind of hinted at in Stefan's opening remarks, and maybe Claire, maybe you could start. Do you either in the innovation business side, commercial side, if you like, AI, but also on the ethical side, is there a potential for a leading role for Europe here? Gene
okay, thanks, Paul. Yeah, it's a really good question, I think, and it's very interesting because it takes me back to my previous job, which was working on technology and indeed the legislative framework for AI. So I think, first of all, what we said in the Farm to Fork strategy is that Europe needs to be competitive in this space. We have to move forward here. And I think that everything that we've been doing now in terms of the Green Deal shows that we need tools so that we can make the most of innovation. I think if you look at what's happened on the AI side, and the strategic move in terms of coming forward with having a framework for regulating AI and taking account of the ethical concerns has been to try and make sure that we develop AI in Europe, that we're not behind the curve. So I think we are at a very similar moment now in terms of biotechnology and its development. If you read the study, you'll see from that we say a lot of the research is happening elsewhere than in Europe at the moment. That's pretty much the same in AI, no? All the investment has been taking place in the US and China. We have to make more investment here in Europe. So I think we do need more research here, and we need an innovation-friendly framework for the regulation, one which takes account of our sustainability concerns and targets and uses this technology towards what we want to do on sustainability, but at the same time, which strikes the right balance in terms of the safety and the ethics. So I think it's a very good question because we're at a very similar point in time, I think, in terms of reworking our regulatory framework so that we can embrace innovation and be more competitive globally.
Okay, back to you, Stefan. That gives me an excuse to get through Tessa's question, to get back to you. One of the comments you made in your opening remarks, you came up with some very fine words about we're entering a new era in biotechnology and exceptional opportunities to address societal challenges are opening up. I mean, if from the outside, cynics or people who are less familiar with the topic might say this is industry hubris, and you would say that, wouldn't you? But I think maybe to be fair to the private sector industry, a lot of the science and research is being done by companies like yours. But how do you strike a balance between maybe almost overselling the potential of these technologies whilst taking into account people's instinctive concerns about new technologies?
regulatory. That brings us back to what Jort mentioned in the beginning. I think I also made a remark on this already in my opening statement. I think we need a really broad societal debate around the risks and opportunities of those new technologies. This is also, I mean, for us, the reason why we initiated this discussion today, to really have an honest debate about what's possible and what is not possible, what the technology can deliver, what can't it deliver, and also as a society to really define the lines. Where do we want to use it and where don't we want to use it? And Claire has already pointed out that sustainability considerations will be part also of a new regulatory framework when it comes to new genomic techniques. So I think it's paramount really to consider here both sides, and to be also open in the debate, and discuss also challenges that we see. Traceability, for example, is one that we need to work on, that we really can ensure that the consumer knows what he is consuming, or that he has a choice in deciding what he wants to buy. And I think this is what also we from the industry side, from research side, are working on, that we can ensure that for the future.
Thank you, Stefan. And back to you, Julian. Do you accept the basic premise of Tessa's question, that there may be quite interesting parallels, certainly on the ethical side, between genome technologies and AI? Are they similar debates?
I'm stuck here. The EGE did produce a statement on AI as well, fairly recently. We didn't actually address the similarities between the two new technologies, but I think we have to think about that. Can I comment very briefly on the difference between Europe and the rest of the world, if I might, because it's becoming a really major issue, and it's in the question. Europe has essentially rejected the use of modern biotechnology in agriculture. We've had very little use of that technology. That has resulted in many developing countries choosing not to use the technology for all sorts of reasons, including their wish to export into the EU. But what we might be going to be seeing is that these new technologies don't necessarily leave a fingerprint when they're used. And if you have total deregulation, as you will have in the United States, it'll be very difficult to have any traceability other than a paper trail. And even then it may be difficult, because the use of a plant which has been modified to create a new plant will become very, very common. So we have to think about the difference between the EU, which is looking at the impact on the consumer, and countries like the United States, which are not, at least at the moment, and how we handle that. So the global position is very difficult to analyze, and I'm not sure how we're going to do it. For GMOs, it was relatively easy because cauliflower mosaic virus promoter was used, and we could identify that quite easily. But that will change with the new gene editing techniques. So there's a great deal to think about in relation to the use of the new technologies. But the main point, I think, is that these new technologies should be able to improve the life of many around the world, especially during this era of climate change. We should be able to modify plants so that they can grow under the new conditions. We should be able to modify animals so that we can get more food if we want to have more food from animal sources, and so on. And we have to think about that as well. So it's a balance. And I think that becomes really important when considering how the regulatory structure works. I don't envy you, Claire, in trying to identify a route through the regulatory structures that we're going to need.
Thank you, Julian. Yes, it's all about balance as always. A broad, almost philosophical question from Catherine Dubois Imperial, which is as follows. Is it not a humanitarian imperative to develop ethically, of course, says Catherine, to utilize innovations such as those we are discussing today? Let's start with you, Jorrit. What do you think about that?
Again, a very good question. But again, there is little to no evidence that the technologies we are addressing today will address the extremely complex issues that our food system are facing. And we do have proven solutions on farm biodiversity, agroecology, seed diversity, etc. And I think there is an imperative to invest in these solutions.
Thank you. Anybody else like to move it on that question from
Yeah, maybe
Stefan?
if I may just, honestly, I think if we see the opportunity, like Julian just laid out, to develop plants which are more suitable and adapted to differing climatic conditions, and we're seeing the impact of climate change happening, of course, also in other regions in the world. So if we have the opportunity to develop plants which are adjusted to that, which are more drought resistant, which can deal with salination in soils, that can really make a contribution also to securing food security in other parts of the world. And I think we should take that opportunity.
Thank you. Before I move to the next question, would Claire or Julian like to answer that question, or you think you've already covered it?
I think maybe just to interject very quickly, this is one of the things that we've taken into account in terms of deciding whether or not to go forward, that we think it wouldn't be, it's a difficult discussion. I mean, everything that we're saying here is proving that, and it's going to be a difficult discussion when we have it with the public, but we think that the opportunities are such that we have to consider that, and you know, the loss of not going ahead and not doing anything is significant enough that it has to be weighed into the balance, which I think is what Catherine's saying in her question.
Yeah. Okay. Let me move on then to a very specific question to you, Claire, from Peter van der Meer, Coordinator VUB Multidisciplinary Program on Sustainable Food and Biomass Systems. So the question from Peter is as follows. Following the, in my view, inconclusive, says Peter, not me, NGT study, the Commission has announced that it will conduct an impact assessment, as Claire said earlier. Given that, in line with the better regulation policy, impact assessments are conducted for proposals for new or changes in regulation. What is the proposed change or new regulation that the impact assessment will be about, Claire?
As I said at the beginning, just to repeat that, when the Commission sent the study to the Parliament and the Council, they said it thought that a policy action was needed on plants. So obviously, Julian, when he spoke, talked about the implications of using the new genomic techniques across the range from plants to animals to humans. But the Commission has said we need a new policy action on plants, because that's where we see the more pressing need to move forward at the moment. And that's where we think we have the best evidence to be able to move forward. And I think that was also clear from what Julian was saying. We will look at where the GMO legislation is no longer fit for purpose. As I said at the beginning, I think the study said it's not fit for purpose in places in relation to the new genetic techniques, and how it's not fit for purpose. But we are still thinking about what exactly the policy options would be, and we haven't taken any decision about what the new regulatory framework would look like. That's why we're consulting. We want to see what the optimal framework would be, how to get the right balance, how to address the concerns that were identified in the study on the environmental and the safety aspects, and in particular to build in sustainability considerations. Obviously, there has to be also how we would coexist with other types of agriculture. I mean, that's one of the things that, Julian made this very strong statement saying Europe has rejected biotechnology in agriculture so far. So how would this fit with what we do on agriculture overall in Europe? And then, of course, this very important point that Jorrit was talking about at the beginning, which is consumer information. I think it's clear that the public perception of biotech is crucial for the market take-up. So we have to address that issue, as we go forward in the work that we do around the impact assessment and the consultation.
Thank you. Okay, and we'll come back to that, I think, in the final 15 minutes of the discussion, because all of you are picking up some. I think that's a great question. Maybe Jorrit, you could. I know you spend a lot of your time thinking about the CAP. You give a first response to Henk's question.
Sorry, you froze for a second. Can
Yeah,
you
the
please
question.
repeat the question?
I'll repeat the question from Henk Timmermans. Says Henk, excuse my ignorance, says Henk, but is there a relationship between CAP reform and the biorevolution? Could the panel please comment? I know you spend a lot of time analyzing the CAP. So what do you think?
I don't think it's really related, or there's not really a strong relationship. However, we can say that the CAP was the occasion to set in motion a transition towards, again, agroecology, crop rotation, nature-friendly farming, etc. And it was not nearly as ambitious as we would have liked. So I don't think we're there yet. Okay.
Anybody else like to respond to Henk's question? It's quite specific, but maybe you're not into that area. No, I don't see any takers. Fine. Well, let me move on then to this broader discussion. I mean, I think it'd be useful. I know we only have an hour and a quarter for this discussion today, but I think already the contours of a future debate are starting to be identifiable. And I think everybody on this panel is, on the one hand, recognizes the challenges, but on the other, without trying to put words in your mouth, wants to go forward and try and seek as broad a consensus as possible. So a question to Stefan and Jorrit, maybe in the first instance. In your view, gentlemen, how can all the stakeholders involved, regulators, civil society, businesses, and so on, contribute to an honest societal debate on new biotechnological technologies? I mean, we know what's happened in the past. We know it hasn't particularly worked. Wouldn't it be rather refreshing and also rather sensible to have a very new approach to a debate? Maybe Stefan, you could kick off first.
Sure. I think, what we really need is to look at risks and opportunities. I think, that was one point mentioned when we first started out with GM technology. I think there was really a focus on the opportunities that we saw in the technology. Little talk about any lines that we didn't want to cross as a society in using those technologies. I think we're beyond that today. I think there are clearly also risks that we do see and that we need to also then address in the regulatory system for new breeding technologies. In that sense, I think the discussion really has moved on. And I also see that we have a much stronger debate, of course, how these technologies today can contribute to sustainability. And they're actually, just coming back maybe to this question on the CAP reform, I do see also a link there with the CAP reform. One of the major goals of the CAP reform was really, as Jorrit said, to introduce more sustainability elements, to come to a more sustainable food production system in the future. And I think we will see and will have a debate, and we'll have to have a debate on how the new technologies can also contribute from a sustainability point of view.
Well, you'll know, Stefan, without being too blunt, historically, many people and regulators, consumers, regulators alike, have been sort of suspicious of industry in this area. Secretiveness and obviously self-interest going forward, which is maybe the way the private economy, sector economy works. But could you give us an idea of how either your company specifically or your sector more broadly has changed in terms of how it interacts with other players?
Certainly. I think we are being much more transparent as in the past, as an industry, as a company, in discussing these things with society. For example, if I just take now the example of plant protection here, We are now publishing all the studies that we're doing for the approval of new products, for example. So they're open in the public domain for all to revisit, to also challenge. So I think there is a more transparent dialogue really ongoing, also from the industry side, when it comes to approval processes. Also, the data that's backing the approvals is made transparent and public, and we're moving forward in that direction also on the biotech side.
And Claire, if I may ask you, from a regulatory point of view, do you recognise that change from the industry's perspective? Have they changed the way they go about their business in this area?
I think that industry is very conscious of the mistakes of the past, I would say. Yeah? So I think they are approaching things in a different way. But I think we all need to approach things in a different way. I think here, we have to have a discussion on the opportunities and risks, and have that discussion with the public in the light of the current sustainability challenges that we're facing. We need to do it at the European level. So we have kicked it off. We've already been engaging, and we'll have a conference in November. And I think we are thinking about other ways that we can do the outreach this time around. Also, the member states have to do it as well. We've had a first discussion with them in the council, and I think they are conscious of the need to engage and have a debate on this, and that we all need to do that in parallel. It's going to be complicated, of course. I mean, the science is complicated, but I think we have to do a very honest job in terms of trying to put the arguments out there. And I believe at the end of the day that the public know what's best for them, and they may not be able to understand the intricacies of all the arguments, but we have to do our best, certainly from the Commission's point of view as civil servants, in terms of putting those arguments forward and engaging and seeing what people decide that they want to do. I mean, we have to have faith in the public as well in terms of informing themselves and taking decisions.
Thank you. Well, if I could maybe ask you a similar question, Julian, well, a related question to be more precise. You're an expert, you have that label, like it or not. Do you see an enhanced role, almost an indispensable role going forward for people like yourself and the scientific community more broadly to step up and explain, obviously in neutral, impartial terms, what's at play, what's at stake? Or do you think that's not your role and to get involved in that kind of discussion and exercise? We can't quite hear you, Julian. I'm not sure if anybody else can.
That's a nice question, actually, because it's become really important. When we started talking about that, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Good.
We can. Sorry, go ahead.
When we started on talking about GMOs in the 1980s, we started to talk about a concept of what we call the deficit model. If we explain it carefully, in short words, then people will understand and want it. It's nonsense. What we've got to do is to get as much understanding as possible and get people engaged in trying to formulate what is needed and what is wanted. And we've made that mistake too often. Yes, I think there is a role for experts. I've been involved since early 1980, so that's 40 years. And we need to think about what are the issues, why are people concerned? QAnon doesn't help us, but we've got to try and find a way to assure the technology is acceptable to those who will use it. And it's not an easy task.
Thank you, Julian. And go back to you. I have not forgotten that I want to ask you more or less the same question that I asked Stefan just now about how to go about getting this inclusive discussion with all stakeholders. And if I could tag on to that, do you think in broad terms, without being too specific, the civil society world still has high levels of suspicion about industry, or is that less so than it was a few years ago? You're it.
Sorry, could you please repeat that?
The question was, how well, tagging on, so the broad question I asked also Stefan, from your point of view, how can we make sure that we have this open, honest debate with all stakeholders about these new technologies going forward? But tagging on to that, to what extent, if at all, are there levels of suspicion in broad civil society groups towards industry, frankly, in this area?
Well, I think, first of all, we need also a wider conversation on the food system we would like to see. And the conversation and the suspicion is currently not per se about the innovation, but about the playground. The industry and the European Commission say that it's impossible to detect new GMOs in food, but this is in contrast of evidence from the plant breeding sector that identification of plant varieties is already being done using biochemical and molecular techniques. And the Commission didn't put any resources towards the research to develop these detection methods. So it's fairly easy to say that they're not really detectable. And besides, there are ways, for example, with regards to the transparency to label products without needing to have them detected in a lab. We can see this, for example, in the organic labels, the fair trade labels. And these are labels and certifications which rely on documentation from the farm level to consumers, which are then not tested in a lab. And to relate this to the debate, you cannot have an honest debate with citizens if they wouldn't be able to choose to have GM-free food, or farmers who wouldn't be able to choose and grow GM-free food if they're no longer traceable and labeled. And finally, and again, in order to have an honest debate, we shouldn't confuse citizens about gene editing in the medical field and the farm fields for the reasons mentioned before. They may be the same technologies, but the implications on society, I believe, are very different.
Thank you, Jorrit. Before I go back to questions in the chat, Claire, do you want to respond to Jorrit's assertion about the Commission that he claims didn't allocate sufficient resources or resources at all to detection, if I understand Jorrit's point correctly?
Well, I think I'm not sure what we've done in terms of funding the detection methods. I mean, that's something I would have to check. But what I would say is that the need to change the existing framework is not just related to the detection methods. I mean, that is one of the arguments that's out there, of course, which is that because we can't detect, then we need to change the framework. But it's not only that. I mean, there are other issues which relate to the scientific and technological progress that we have through the NGTs, which means we need to reconsider the framework, which means that it becomes very legally uncertain. So, I mean, of course, look further into this question about detection methods, but that's not the only reason for changing the framework. Thank you.
I'll go back to questions from the audience. I just remind the audience that we're running out of time, so if you want to ask a question, it's basically now or never. A question from Pierre Gröning. He says, a 2019 McKinsey study showed that biotech startup activity in France, Germany, and Sweden has decelerated over the past few years. This mainly because of, claims Pierre, finance issues and bureaucratic obstacles. What can we do about it? Who would like to try and take a stab at answering that question? Any volunteers? I mean, Claire, the question about bureaucratic obstacles, it's very easy for the Commission to be accused of being itself one big bureaucratic obstacle, but do you want to respond to that aspect at least? Is that a fair comment or slightly unfair?
Thank you very much, Paul. I feel much better about myself. No. I mean, of course, but I think, behind this is a very serious point, which is the one that I've been trying to say, which is that we need to get the regulatory framework right. And at the moment, we think it's not fit for purpose. And this may well be why the biotech startup activity hasn't been thriving. I mean, it's not just this particular bureaucratic or regulatory framework. There may be others that are relevant, of course. But that's what we're here for, to make sure that we try and adapt the framework, bring it up to speed and make it more innovation friendly. And that's what we definitely want to do here. Again, to respond to what Jorrit was saying, it's not about deregulation in this case, it's about re-regulation, I would say. I'm not sure it's quite the right word for it, but anyway, in terms of getting a proportionate regulatory framework. Right.
Thank you. Julian, you want to come in again, Julian?
Yes, if I'm... the regulatory framework that we have at the moment for new technologies is extremely expensive. And that means that small organizations can't do it. Bayer, Monsanto that was, Pioneer and so on can afford the regulatory structures just. But a university or a small research organization or a small company can't, simply because of the cost and time needed to meet the regulatory burden. And we have to think about how we address that. So I think the question is really important and correct. Responding to Jorrit, if I may, the problem we have is that a lot of the food and feed that we use in Europe is not produced in Europe. We bring it from all over the world. Maize, for example, soybean, for example, are brought from elsewhere. If the new technologies are used elsewhere and we don't have mechanisms for ensuring paper traceability, we're in trouble, because there's necessarily no way of detecting the changes that are made in some of the products that will be on the market. So we have to think rather hard. Do we close our borders?
Okay.
I'm feeling that at the moment, and I go into a supermarket in England and find there's nothing on the shelves. So I know what closing borders is like. But we've got a serious problem, which we have to think about in resetting up the regulatory structures.
Okay. Jorrit, you want to come back in as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course, Julian, there's nothing to be said against what you're mentioning right now. And this is also why I was referring before to the wider conversation about the food system we would like to see within our European continent. And I really think we need to define together, like, what are the issues, what are the external factors that we have, and how to deal with them. I'm definitely not in favor of closing our borders, but I am in favor of more closed nutrient cycles, where nutrients don't have to be shipped all over the world in order to get to European soils. And from that perspective, also degrading other soils. But that's, again, a totally different debate that I don't want to open up in the final 5 minutes of this.
Right, next time. We'll have you back for the next time. Okay, I think we'll have to maybe the final question from the chat, because I want to ask the panel to give some concluding remarks and put you, the audience, our final poll question. So the question from the audience, from Joseph Huggard, Managing Director of the Huggard Consulting Group. His question is as follows: given the speed of technology development and the fact that the knowledge base for this lies mainly in industry and academics linked to industry, as we saw with the development of the COVID vaccines, how do we see the development of the ability to assess the benefit-risk trade-off if sometimes simplistic conflict of interest considerations can lead to the exclusion of these very experts from the risk assessment process on which the regulator replies? That's a really interesting question. Maybe that's one for you, Julian, because you're one of those experts that the Commission and the regulators seek advice from.
I need to say yes. It's a very difficult one. Michael Gove, who's a senior minister in the British government, said we don't need experts in 2016. Something I find absolutely unacceptable. But we've got to understand that those who have worked in the field, have an understanding of the field, can be of assistance to the decisions which are being made in relation to the use of the new technologies. Why is mobile phone technology acceptable to the public, but GMO technology isn't? What exactly is the cause of that? There's a question from a colleague which follows this one in relation to so-called traditional modification using UV radiation or even X-rays. They may affect the plant much more than the new relatively precise technologies that we have available. Why are they not as regulated as the the new technologies? And my answer is absolutely. You're right. We should be regulating all technologies that have an influence on our food, not just the so-called new technologies.
Thank you, Julian. Anybody else want to come in on this one before I...
If I can, I'm happy to respond.
Okay, sorry, I don't know whether maybe...
Before
Can I come in, Paul, quickly?
Yes, please do, Claire, yes.
Okay, sorry, I think this is a really crucial question, and maybe as Julian's saying, what we've seen during the vaccines crisis can help us there, no? Because even though Mr. Gove and others don't necessarily attach that much importance to experts anymore, I mean, the politicians have had to rely on the experts during this process. But obviously, for the scientists and for the experts, for their opinion to be valid, it has to be clear that it's objective and it has to be independent, that there are no conflicts of interest. I mean, this is something that we struggle with all the time, and it's why we have something like the European Food Safety Agency, which is intended to be an independent agency, which of course brings in expertise in a very careful way in terms of making sure that the experts don't have the specific conflicts. So, I mean, that's how we've tried in the European system to make sure that the independent expert advice is independent. But this is a constant challenge that we have all the time, just making sure that we do listen to all sides and that there is balance as we go forward.
Okay, right. I'm going to ask all of you to conclude that more or less the same question. But before I pose that question to all four of you, let me inform the audience that poll question number 2 is as follows. Which concerns, in your view, are most critical when considering the future use of genome editing? And we're given a choice: societal value added, health, environment, safety, transparency, and ethics, disadvantages to society from not using it. I'm not sure that list is exhaustive, but you're allowed to add another one if you choose to respond to that poll question. And we'll hope to get the answers for you before we finally conclude. So, by way of conclusion, my question to all four of you is, I could ask about a maybe wishy-washy question like, how optimistic are you about the future? Then you might just say very or not so much, would not be very, very enlightening. So one of the themes of today, and I slightly pushed it, but you didn't need much pushing, is how to do things differently going forward on this debate, so we don't have a rerun of things in the past. And I think, without putting words in any of your mouths, you all seem to be very receptive to that need and that desire to do things differently in the future, bringing all stakeholders together for an open, honest debate. So how would, if in a few seconds, all of you, and I'll start with Jorrit, then Julian, then Stefan, then Claire, what would you suggest needs to be done or could be done to try and bring forward, nurture this more open, honest, inclusive debate? Jorrit.
Thank you. I've been mentioning a few parts already, which I think that sum up this whole or answer this question. And first of all, the transparency within the food chain is extremely important. The democratic choice of both consumers and farmers is extremely important. And I do think from a regulatory point of view, again, we are not aiming to ban GMOs. We're asking to keep them, have a regulation which is fit for purpose, which ensure traceability, safe products, and the labeling they use. In order to have a truly open debate, I think that all these forms of agriculture need to be having a fair spot in society. They all need to be discussed in an even way, if they come from larger organizations or indeed small-scale farmers, which were also mentioned in the questions before. Everyone needs to have open access to technologies as well as to different production methods. And an institution like the European Commission should support also the techniques that might not have a bigger industry behind them, like agroecology. And if we have an open debate like that, I think we can move forward a fair bit.
Perfect. Thank you, Jorrit. Julian, over to you, sir.
Thank you. I think these technologies, is not one, are the most exciting in my lifetime. We have the ability to do so much, and we've seen that with the development of the mRNA vaccines. We can do that with so much in the region of food, where we need food. And it's not just in the field, but the way we distribute food, the way we provide food and feed in towns and cities all around the world. We have the ability, we should be using it. We have to be careful, which I agree with Jorrit completely. We have to be careful that that which we introduce does not harm humanity. And I say humanity because the impact on the environment is also something we have to think about.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julian. Stefan.
3 points from my side. First of all, I think what is needed is really transparency from all sides. And this also goes for us in industry. I've mentioned the example, what we as a company are doing in that regard. I think being as transparent as possible, really explaining what we're doing and why we're doing it, and giving also the background and details of the science behind those new products. I think that's important. So transparency. I think it's important really to have open consultation processes. And the Commission, Claire has mentioned that, has already announced that they will do such a consultation process. So for everyone really to be able to participate in that debate, to create those fora to be able to participate in that debate. And last but not least, I think we also really openly need to discuss both advantages and disadvantages. I think that's a learning from the past, from the debates that we had in the past, where maybe also we as an industry were too much really focusing only on the opportunities and less so on also the risks involved. I think that's a learning that we took away from the discussions that we had in the past on GMOs. So also to have an open debate on downsides, and then define as a society where we want to go and what's beyond, and what's beyond the red lines that we draw as a society.
Thank you, Stefan. And a final word to you, Claire.
Okay, thanks. So I would say 3 things. I think I'm very impressed by what Julian says about the fact that we are maybe on the cusp of this biorevolution. And what we have to do is have a public debate so that people can understand the choices that they're making. Second, I would say, how should we frame that debate? I think we very much have to do it now in the light of all the sustainability considerations and what kind of choices we want to make there in terms of how we use this technology. And third, it has to be a debate at European level, of course, but it also has to take place at national and regional level. And we have to explain the choices honestly. But I think, as Julian says, it can't be simplistic in the way that we do that. We have to explain the complexity of it. And that's why events like this are so important, I think, in terms of helping us fine-tune our skills in explaining that complexity. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much. Great stuff. Well, we have to bring this to a close. I found it, I don't know about you, absolutely fascinating. My thanks to all of you out there watching this debate. My thanks to those of you who asked questions. There are very many of you who asked very interesting questions. And of course, last but not least, my thanks to the wonderful panel we've been listening to for the past hour and a quarter or so. As I said at the outset, this is the first of a series of BioLive talks, so hopefully you'll be involved and stay tuned for the next in the series. So all I need to do now is very pleasantly wish you all a lovely day and see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.